Now, this is not the mark. This is the mark of a sort of mafia family. It's not the mark of what you expect the royal family to behave. And so the assumption is that this stuff is now with Putin as well. And in this 4-day trip, he had 40 prostitutes brought to him, which people marveled at because he was also doing official duties. And almost as soon as one was dispatched, another one would arrive. And he was swapping them with an Arab prince who was also in the hotel.
Okay, let's talk now about Andrew. And the basic allegation is this is a man who uses his public position to line his own nest in terms of money. There's money and sex. But let's focus on the money first of all. There is the pitch at the palace thing, and there's also an official position where he's connected to the Department of Trade and Industry to promote British industry abroad. Okay, but you're basically saying that while he was on the public dime, he was having a lot of sex and also purloining money and lining his own nest. Tell us a bit about the basic allegation.
Yes, well, I mean, he was appointed, when he came, he basically got as far as he could get in the Navy, and they ran out of jobs to invent for him. So in 2001, he came out, and King Charles warned about him. He said, you know, don't give him this job. He'll abuse it. He'll just go and use it to find nice golf courses around the world. And that's exactly what he did do. I mean, there's stories of turning up in South Africa on trips organised 6 months ahead and saying, actually, it's a sunny day, I don't feel like doing this, I'm going to go and play golf. But I think he started off with the best of intentions, and he wanted to make this work, and he was sent off as a trade representative to promote British trade, to use the soft power of the royal family to open doors that perhaps politicians couldn't open. And in some areas, particularly the Middle East, he was quite effective at doing that. The problem was he wasn't properly directed, and this is one of the problems through his life. When he's focused, for example, in the Falklands War, he steps up to the plate. But most of the time, there's no proper control of him, and he goes off and does his own thing, and he's very unstructured. He needs a structure, rather like Prince Harry. And that's why the Navy was a good place for him, because there was a strong hierarchy, and there was a structure to his life and a focus. So he has this job to promote British trade. He has paid his expenses. He is criticised often for using private jets when commercial airlines are fine, or taking helicopters when he can go by car. So he proves to be very expensive. He's a guy who kind of likes the jet set life, and doesn't realise that, you know, this is taxpayers' money. But I think the problem was he then got involved with various people. Epstein was one, and another was a man called David Rowland, who basically became his unofficial business advisor. And Andrew began to shoehorn Rowland into these trips abroad, and indeed particular meetings. So ambassadors would be told, you know, I know you've done a program of people that I should meet, but these are the people I really want to meet. And he would stay in hotels rather than with the ambassador, partly because it gave him independence in terms of women brought into him, but it gave him also independence in who he saw. And he began to do his own business on the side, helping the Rowlands. So the Rowlands, for example, set up a bank in the Middle East, helped by Andrew and indeed one of his former private secretaries who had a key position there. He was used to promote, to do various businesses in China. And in return, the Havilands lent him money, which he never had to repay. They got invited to Balmoral for tea with the Queen and to weddings of his daughters. So it was a very nice, cosy relationship. They got, again, status, again, useful contacts, and they basically gave him a little cut. And in fact, he had a business with them. He had 40% of a business called, I think, Inverness Management. Inverness is his Scottish title, the Earl of Inverness. So that was one area we made money. And this was the problem when the alleged Chinese spy, Ten Bo, popped up in the immigration tribunal, that actually Ten Bo being one of the people pushing his activities in China. This was subsequent. So basically he got sacked from that job as special trade envoy because there were so many complaints that actually he was actually counterproductive, and he was irritating business leaders rather than supporting them. And so he'd set up this thing, which actually in principle was a good idea, called Pitch at Palace. It had all the benefits of use of Buckingham Palace and James's Palace, the Queen turning up, the Grenadier Guards taking part. And the idea was to bring investors and entrepreneurs together to give them seed money to develop their inventions. Very, very good idea, and it was rolled out across the world. The problem was it was a charity, but he then set up separately something called Pitch at Palace Global, which was a business. And one of in the small print of the contracts was that 2% of the money from investors would be going to Picture Palace Global. So he was creaming off money, and we now know from looking at some of the accounts that that money was being, that was what he was living off in recent years. But there are also other areas which again raise concerns, and these actually came up because of court cases. One was a court case in 2022 with a man called Selman Turk, who was charged with fraud. And in the course of that case, it emerged that Turk had paid Andrew £750,000, Sarah Ferguson £250,000, and one of the daughters £25,000, money that they couldn't really account for. For example, they said it was for a birthday present, a wedding present, large sums of money for someone that they claimed they didn't know. And what was also suspicious is that Selman Turk had been a winner of one of these Pitch at the Palace sort of pitches as well, and they'd become very friendly with him. So there was another case which emerged just through a whistleblower of Andrew taking a £3.85 million bung, in effect, for introducing a Greek water company to Kazakhstan, financed by a Swiss finance house. Now, in the end, the deal never came off, but we know from the correspondence which was leaked that was his commission. And that was a suspicion. He was doing a lot of business in Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan, two Central Asian republics in which Britain was keen to invest, and so he spent a lot of time there, but where he got very friendly with the rulers who were despots, really. I mean, there were no human rights there, no free elections, and they were all sort of lining their own pockets, a bit like Russia, I suppose, after Glasnost. That was a concern, and the Queen was supporting him in many of these ventures. So she was entertaining these people at Windsor, they were giving her gifts. When people raised concerns, I know, for example, the intelligence services raised concerns about his activities in Kazakhstan that the Queen basically didn't want to know. And initially I thought she just put her head in the sand, she was an old lady, she didn't want to go there. But increasingly I've come to the conclusion that she actually shut down anything, and people knew there was no point following this through. Private secretaries, for example, just gave up. One of the heads of the Foreign Office talked to me and said basically they just gave up complaints because it wasn't going to go anywhere. And she, expressed her displeasure to people if they did raise these things. So one of the problems is ambassadors who did complain suddenly found that their next posting was to Nigeria, or the police protection officer who raised concerns about something found that he was no longer on the protection squad and he was back on the beat in Brixton. So there were ways of making their displeasure felt. And people learnt that it was better to keep quiet than to say anything. So Andrew knew he was protected. It would never come out. And the fact is, I've tried for 4 years through FOI requests to get access to the files on his trips as a special trade envoy, material which should be in the National Archives. He was taxpayer funded, he was a civil servant, they shouldn't be protected by any sort of royal privilege. And yet, despite hundreds of requests, they've used every exemption possible to deny me access to this material, because it would reveal some of the people he took. And what I do know from talking to the diplomats, 2 of the people he took were his own daughters. So they were actually taken on these trips with all the attendant costs of extra security. And basically built up a very nice contacts book, which they're now beginning to exploit. So only the other day we had Beatrice opening a bank in Saudi Arabia. She's now got a job with a firm which gives her, she's now moving at these very high level conferences. Now this is someone who, without her connections and contacts, would not have that job. So again, it's a sort of Nepo babe there. And Andrew's ambitions have been transferred to his daughters. He realizes his days are finished, but he can at least work on getting one of them at least as a working royal. So there's a huge PR campaign going on there, and perhaps making a bit of money on the side. And what we forget is just the amount of money that is spent on lawyers and on PR people by the Yorks. We have this idea that they go off and do good deeds and that's it. But there's a huge operation going on to present them in the best possible light, and actually to threaten people who don't toe the line. So everyone signs NDAs, not just their staff, but anyone who has any dealings with them. threats were made to me and my publisher before the book came out, that my social media would be monitored, that they would be coming down on me like a house of bricks if there was anything there they didn't like in the book. Now, this is not the mark. This is the mark of a sort of mafia family. It's not the mark of what you expect the royal family to behave.
You said complaints. Complaints were suppressed, or people discovered if they made a complaint that it wouldn't end well for them. Complaints about what, though? Because we're discussing the money, and we're going to get onto the sex.
Yep.
Are you saying the complaints were that Andrew wasn't doing his job properly,
Yep.
or he was lining his own pockets? Is that what you're saying?
No,
the complaints
well,
were?
the complaints were mainly about not doing his job properly as
Okay.
a special trade envoy, but there were also complaints about lining his own pockets. So,
Okay.
this, for example, this intelligence officers reporting to the Queen's private secretary was about a $5 million commission in a suitcase that they had seen in Kazakhstan. That was their contact was the courier. So that was about taking a bung. A lot of it was and people wrote letters. For example, the ambassador in Tunisia wrote a letter to the Telegraph about it, and the stories began to appear in the press from diplomats complaining about facts. And then clearly I write about it in the book. I interviewed a number of people on the record who talked about the fact that actually he was counterproductive, and they didn't really know what he was doing. Andrew didn't know what he was doing really. The Foreign Office didn't really, or the Department of Trade didn't really understand why he was being sent off, and certainly the ambassadors felt that he would just turn up. In New York, for example, the consulate, I mean, he wasn't even tasked. He would just turn up with Fergie in tow, and they would have to try and find something for him to do, try and find her a place at the dinner, and all they were doing is going around collecting business cards for them to do their own business.
Okay, so let's talk about the sex bit then, because again, the allegation in the book is he has a voracious sexual appetite, and part of the connection with Epstein is a constant supply of women. And you mentioned this famous trip, notorious trip now, I think it was to Thailand.
Yep.
So talk to us about the Thailand trip, and talk to us a bit more about the sex problem, as it were.
Well, the Thailand trip was when he was asked to go to the celebrations for the King of Thailand in 2004. Though he in fact had several trips to Thailand, both official and unofficial. Thailand was his playground, basically. He had a very good friend who had a house there. Thailand, as you know, is a place where anything goes. No one knew him. It's a very tight society, so stories wouldn't have got out. And on this trip, according to Andrew McGregor Marshall, who was the Reuters correspondent, who talked to a lot of hotel staff as part of his job, Andrew went to the best-known hotel there. He insisted on staying there rather than the residence. He liked the nightclub. That's where he picked up a lot of the girls. And in this 4-day trip, he had 40 prostitutes brought to him, which people marveled at because he was also doing official duties. And almost as soon as one was dispatched, another one would arrive. And he was swapping them with an Arab prince who was also in the hotel. He was recommending, I think you'll like this one, she's to your taste. And that was confirmed by Ian Proud, who was a diplomat in the embassy, and also by a woman who was part of the Thai royal circles. And in fact, I then got a story from her. Her driver was very friendly with Andrew's driver and has stories of young, rather effeminate men being taken to some of the parties and taken to Andrew's room. Now, I don't think that's an indication of bisexuality. I think it was just to sort of make the party go with a swing. But there have been rumours about Andrew's bisexuality. I mean, it's always, from my experience, second-hand. I haven't, so I didn't put any of that in the book. But whenever I go and give talks, there are always people with stories about that. So, I mean, that may again, play into this, voracious sexual appetite. But there were other places he went. I mean, there's a story in Kazakhstan of him going into nightclubs, going into the VIP room, girls being brought to him there, including a famous Russian pop group. I talked to a Kazakhstan businessman who said that it was standard practice for any businessman going to Kazakhstan to have women provided for him, rather like Russia in the old days, in a honey trap, and then people clearly being presented with the pictures and it being used to blackmail them. So there must be, I think, I'm told there's a lot of compromising material. And again, there's a man called Tim Riley, who worked for Kroll, who's now Don at Cambridge, who talks about compromising material that the Russians have. And my sources talk about material with Mossad, with Libya, with Middle Eastern governments, with China, and clearly with Epstein. I mean, we know Epstein was recording people. I mean, a woman called Juliet Bryant went into the control room and saw them. We know the FBI picked up tapes when they made their raid, they found all the things. I mean, they'd been a tip-off and they'd gone. But I understand that the Palm Beach police did pick up some tapes in 2006. They remain closed. They haven't been made available. I know that the chief of police there was worried that these tapes might disappear, and he gave them to a colleague. One of these men who died mysteriously young in rather suspicious circumstances, but he gave them to someone else called Mark Dugan. And Mark Dugan then took them to Russia, and then, for whatever reason, seems to have got into bed with one of Putin's right-hand men. And so the assumption is that this stuff is now with Putin as well. So there's an awful lot of stuff out there which is, I think, pretty compromising on Andrew. I have another case with a Russian spy and a red-haired spy, a sort of swallow it's called, seducing him in a hotel in Knightsbridge, giving him a Mac which was bugged, giving him some money ostensibly to pay for a holiday for his daughter in Switzerland. And there's also an awful lot, particularly in the Middle East, the way they operate. This is particularly true of, for example, King Juan Carlos of Spain, who was a sort of buddy of Andrew. I mean, his two sort of partners in crime were Mark Thatcher, very similar situation with Margaret Thatcher, a very indulgent mother, reputation for being, putting this, the state above the interests of her son, and actually now emerging was kind of working with her son. So Mark Thatcher was one, and King Juan Carlos was another. And I talked to King Juan Carlos's mistress, and she says that he would be often paid in jewellery. And that's certainly what's happened with the Yorks. They receive a lot of jewellery. I mean, for example, one of their business contacts gave Beatrice on her 18th birthday an £18,000 necklace. And one of the interesting connections, I'm told, is that these royals had very good connections with jewellers. And what's happened is they pass the jewels across to the jewellers sort of adapt them a bit, remove some of the stones, and then this stuff is put out in the market. So that it's a way of fencing stuff. And clearly Juan Carlos was laundering a lot of money because, again, he didn't have any scrutiny. So if you want to launder money, the best person to do it through is a royal.
So now, as you're talking, I'm beginning to see why there might be a motivation for Andrew to travel the world, hence the Department of Trade and Industry thing,
perfect
right?
for him.
Yeah, so you travel the world because you get access to lots of women, whereas back home that might be slightly more problematic.
With no scrutiny. With no scrutiny, you also get access to golf courses.
Yeah.
You're working with people, like the Middle East, who kind of operate in the same level.
Yeah.
Same level of corruption.
Okay.
And you have status, which is so important to him. I mean, because he has no sense of his own identity.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, it's what's not to like.
Okay, but he's not been travelling the world for quite a long time now. So how does this all work when he's at home, in terms of the sexual aspect?
Well, I mean, he has masseurs brought in to him at Royal Lodge. The term is to help him heal. He likes to have these massages to the sound of country music. I mean, his thing is what's called four-handed massages, where two people massage you at the same time for the sort of all-over body experience. So, I mean, he's nothing really has changed. I mean, the women are there on tap for him. He's able to conduct his business. I mean, kind of without scrutiny now, because everyone kind of supposedly forgotten about him. I think he does travel. I mean, I talked to a woman called Denise Martel, who claims to have lived in Royal Lodge with him for 5 years. Now, no one has ever mentioned her. And so there must be a way of her getting in and out. And there are lots of stories of him literally, like, a staff car drives out and he's on the floor of the car under a rug. So plenty of opportunities for him to go and travel abroad still.
Okay.